They made it so you, Brad, could go down tomorrow in California, check a box on the driver's license form, declare yourself female, no hormones, no surgery, nothing, and you've got every legal right in the world to walk into a women's locker room, flop your dick around, and if anyone complains, they get kicked out. And that is the insanity that progressive trans people have brought us to. So someone's got to turn this around.
Bree, thanks for coming on the show.
It's such an honor. I'm such a huge fan of you on Twitter. I didn't know right-wing gays were so cool. So it's a brave new world. When I came out, all the right-wing gays were like 40-year-old Republican men that were closet queens holding secret orgies at Ole Miss. So I guess times have changed.
They certainly have. So I've been following you with interest lately because you've been doing kind of a media tour and making a lot of waves, speaking out as a Democrat and a Democratic strategist and as a prominent trans woman about where you think Democrats and the progressive movement have gone astray on these issues. So we saw this being a huge issue, an outsized issue, really, compared to probably what it should be in the 2024 election. But it was a losing issue, it seems, for Democrats. What do you think happened? How did we get here and what went wrong?
So specifically on the trans issue, it's really straightforward, Brad. I came out 20 years ago and I wanted to be a woman and I wanted to get married. I didn't want my life to be about being trans. So I did what a lot of people did 20 years ago. I transitioned and I went on with my life as best as I could. And that doesn't mean like every once in a while people didn't like figure out I was trans. It just meant like as I was going through my career, I shouldn't talk about it. I just didn't want it to be the focus of who I was or my public presence, which sounded good. But the problem is now the literal lunatics are in charge of trans rights. They are crazy. They have some of the stupidest ideas you've ever seen. And it just keeps spiraling into more and more and more insanity. And Brad, when I came out, just to tell you how much things have changed, when I came out 20 years ago, the idea of vaginoplasty and FFS being covered by insurance was a pipe dream. Like none of us could have dreamed.
That's facial feminization surgery.
Feminization. I never dreamed I'd be able to get married to a man and have it be legal, which it is. So like from so many ways, the trans rights movement is from the way, like the old school way, got us everything we ever dreamed of. And now this group of radicals is just completely tearing it up. And I think the best example of stupid policy happened in California. So for them to accommodate non-binary people, they made it so you, Brad, could go down tomorrow in California, check a box on the driver's license form, declare yourself female, no hormones, no surgery, nothing, and you've got every legal right in the world to walk into a women's locker room, flop your dick around, and if anyone complains, they get kicked out. And that is the insanity that progressive trans people have brought us to. So someone's got to turn this around.
Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from because I feel like it's so funny because you might relate to this, ironically enough. I have simultaneously been attacked over the years for being transphobic. I'll never forget. I was kicked off a gay men's soccer league, excommunicated in Washington, D.C. with all the hyper woke gays because they said that my participation, because I had spoken out about minors transitioning and being very concerned about that, they said my participation in the club made hypothetical future transgender members, there weren't any, to be clear, unsafe. Even though, of course, one, my opinions weren't that crazy, and I always communicate them respectfully. And two, I wasn't talking about them at soccer practice. Yeah. But so I've encountered that side of the movement that you just spoke about. But then I've also gotten attacked as, a pro-trans woke liberal by kind of a lot of the far right types as of late, because I still, and I always have, and I always will, defended the rights of trans adults to live their best lives to not be discriminated against. Even today, I see the Republican member of Congress, Nancy Mace, who I used to like,
Yeah.
using slurs to talk about trans people just openly in her videos from her congressional office. And I'm like, something has really gone astray here.
He
Yeah.
handed her everything she ever needed. Like the American people used to be with us on bathroom stuff, And like, look, I think like when I go into a bathroom, no one cares, right? This is just not an issue for most people. But the truth is, by pushing this issue further and further and further and further and further and further, like there is a sentiment now with normal people where Nancy Mace has a constituency on this stuff. The trans community I transitioned with 20 years ago, we could tell a sister, like, hey, I'm sorry, you're not far enough into electrolysis. Don't use the ladies yet. You need to get your passing skills better so you don't create a scene. That's the old school trans community that took some values I think you can appreciate as a center right gay guy, which is some personal responsibility. Like, if you're a trans woman, you should care about if you're freaking other women out. Like, that's a core rule of women only spaces. And this new movement just utterly does not give a shit, Brad. So, like, I understand, like, don't get me wrong, I don't like Nancy Mace's like opinions on this, but we are creating the Nancy Maces out there by giving them everything they need to destroy us.
Yeah, I think we're living through a pendulum swing, right?
Yeah.
Because the wave of trans activism went so far in the opposite direction that now it's swinging back to the opposite extreme, and we're seeing a lot of this backlash. And we can talk more about the bathroom bills, but I think those go too far and are unnecessary and divisive. But I want us to land somewhere back in this middle. But the trans activists really have taken us off this cliff. I want to know from you, when about did this start? Because I have an idea in my mind of when I remember it changing, but I want to know for you, because the old school transsexuals that you talk about really are the ones who blended in, who most people didn't have a problem with, who are going about their lives. But the new activists, the trans activists, but a lot of them are also non-binary, which we can talk about whether that really constitutes being transgender. They came in. When do you think that happened, and what were the key differences between them and the old school types like yourself?
Okay, so let's go through this one at a time. So one of the really big things this trend changed in the trans community, Brad, is where are the fucking trans girls that are into men anymore? I don't understand it. Like, it used to be 80% of girls transitioning wanted boyfriends easily. Yeah, like certainly, like, I'm not out there dating women, and now all of a sudden, I would guess it's like 80% of these girls are trans lesbians, and the amount of behavior in women's face is just like we're causing all kinds of conflict because we feel entitled to these lesbian spaces, and like so, there's something like fundamentally that has changed about the population of trans girls that are transitioning. And I think it's because we have declinicalized all of the standards here. So when I transitioned, I had to go to a doctor. I had to qualify for gender dysphoria under the DSM-4, which was a much stricter standard than it is today. I urge you, Brad, go look at the standards in the DSM-5 today. I bet for you as a gay man, you would meet 2 of the 6 you need to qualify for gender dysphoria diagnosis, because it's just pedestrian gender nonconformity. So, like, what has happened is we have declinicalized every aspect of this and expanded who is trans. So now fetishistic cross-dressers are trans. Now, really femmy homosexual young men, they're called femboys. They're going on HRT today. They trans.
Say they're they, them.
100%. You've got this non-binary project. You've got these trans masks, which are just, natal females that aren't super girly, and they want to like escape their femininity by claiming this trans identity. So what has happened is the wheels have gone off the movement. And something that's fundamentally healthcare access issue has become this catch-all for every single person in the country that doesn't like fit the stereotypical definition of man or woman. And it's breaking us.
Yeah, it's hard because I often cringe on the right. I hear people who are genuinely like anti-trans say trans people are mentally ill. And I would never put it like that because that carries a stigma or a negativity. But trans people, at least historically, do and did have a mental condition called gender
Yeah,
dysphoria
that's right.
that caused distress and needed alleviating.
That's right.
And so it was a rare medical phenomenon where we wanted to accommodate people so they could live their best lives peacefully and be happy. It was worked out for them. It didn't really cause issues for a whole lot of other
No.
people. But ironically, it seems like the activist crowd has fought to demedicalize this issue at their own peril because the
That's right.
medicalization is kind of what made it legitimate. Like, this
Yeah.
is a real thing people need treatment for. We should, the same way we respect people who have ADHD and might need some accommodations in class to get extra test time, we should accommodate some rare people who experience gender dysphoria. But they say this medicalization is transphobic and that you just are whatever you feel inside. And they've kind of ripped up this old playbook to their own detriment because it became much less legitimate and lost, I
That's
think,
right.
a lot of public support as a result. Because you end up with somebody just saying they're trans is enough, or just saying you feel like a different gender, or you're a they, them, or I'm a neo pronouns. It just opened up the world. And I think in doing so, lost legitimacy in a lot of people's eyes.
It's also catching a lot of young gay people up in this stuff, right? Look,
Mm-hmm.
Brad, you're 100% on with this. And look, this isn't like, I understand, like, there's such a tendency to look at the past and to feel like every single thing in the trans rights movement needs to copy things in the past. And like homosexuality being in the DSM as a disorder, I think all of us would agree that is not called for. Gender identity disorder does need to be in the DSM. I had a condition. I've had it since I was a child. I went to a doctor. I went on hormones. I went to an endocrinologist. I had a plastic surgeon work on my face, and I got better. And I can look at those criteria today, Brad, and I don't qualify for gender dysphoria. My life, my body, my presentation is 100% in alignment with how I feel. Married to a really delightful man. I get called she, her everywhere I go, any room I walk into, and it's great. And I don't consider myself mentally ill anymore. But if you are looking for the public policy of them covering vaginoplasty or FFS or all these other surgeries, I'm sorry, this has to be medicalized. And it is this distance between real public policy and this fantasy progressive world that a lot of people are living in. It's just killing our whole movement.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder as well if it's the substance of the issues, right? So it's non-binary, it's delegitimizing, demedicalizing the trans experience, and so much more. A callous approach towards women's spaces, women's sports,
Yes.
other things. But I also think it's actually not just the substance, but also the kind of tone and tenor of the trans
Yes.
activism
Yes.
being incredibly just aggressive and hostile towards people that disagree with you, in
Yes.
kind of contrast to the successful part of the gay rights movement that was like, let us get married, we're just like you. They celebrated people who went from opposing gay marriage to supporting it, right? Like Obama, Biden flipped on this and were celebrated for it. Now it's like, oh, well, you might be pro-trans now, but there's tweets from you in high school where you used the T slur.
Exactly.
And I can't help but just feel like, just approach-wise, the trans movement is one of the most radically self-destructive activist movements I've ever seen. It even makes
We,
people like me
yeah.
feel like I'm in opposition to it, even though I'm basically pro-trans. Like,
So
it,
get real with me, Brad. Like, I'm just gonna make a guess here because we're not. I hope we'll become really good friends. But I'm just gonna make a guess about you. You probably have had many moments in the last 5 years, I'm guessing, where you've said something and some trans person is showing up in your mentions and they are tone policing you and bringing out the moralization, and even you as a gay man. Because I think if you and I sat down and compared our childhood, we'd find a lot in common, right? We're different, but there's a lot there, and you just probably understand being born differently, right? So even you as a gay man, I bet there have been 1,000 moments over the last 5 years that you've just gone like, can you just act normal for 5 minutes? Is that it?
absolutely. But then you get
Yeah.
accused of respectability politics. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point, actually. We want
Yeah.
people to respect us and our rights.
This is something I've thought about so much, but I would love your opinion on this. This is really getting real with you. When I look at the trans girls I know that have integrated and socialized and have gone on to have partners and jobs, just like the bare minimum for a successful life, why the hell is it that all of us came from conservative households? Like, I think about this a lot. On my show, Dollcast, all of us came from conservative backgrounds, and all of us took integration very seriously. What I feel has happened is this fringe progressive ideology is setting trans people up for failure. Because when I transitioned, there was a document you could read, and it is almost like, look, you have a really serious condition. If you take agency in your life and you go do these steps, start with go to a therapist for 3 months, we can talk about giving you hormones. Get on hormones, go to an endocrinologist. We can look at writing some letters, like go get a job, like work for a year full time. We can talk about getting you vaginoplasty. So every single step of this was encouraging you to move deeper into transition and to take some responsibility and to integrate. And that set a lot of us up for success. What is happening today is trans women are women. And you just declare mission success before you even start. So I don't know why we're surprised that so many of the trans girls today don't act like women. It's just setting everyone up for failure.
It is, and it's kind of tragic because the people who are like you are the ones who are bearing the brunt of that
Yeah.
backlash most often. And what's unfortunate as well is, and maybe I'm even guilty of this to some extent because I discuss, for example, I just did a whole episode breaking down Chase Strangio, the ACLU lawyer advocating for transitioning minors before the Supreme Court, and Chase is like the face of trans activism at the moment. And I guess where I'm going with this is that I know from my personal life, there are trans people all across this country who are sane, good, decent people with jobs and families who are huge positives to their community, but they're not the ones going on TV to represent the trans community. They're not the ones going viral on TikTok representing the trans community. They're not the ones employed by the alphabet organizations as spokespeople. It's like the radical fringe of the trans community, and this is also true to some extent for the gay community, are like the faces of it. And I feel that they give everyone a bad name because they're so extreme and I think so understandably off-putting to people that people are unfortunately kind of binary black or white thinkers. And they think, oh, I must be against trans because Chase
Yeah.
Strangio is on my TV telling me 2-year-olds know their gender truth. And I'm against that. In
Yeah.
reality, it's like, you don't have to accept at face value that everyone is like that, but it is unfortunately human nature. And I think bad representation for a movement can be a fatal flaw when it comes
Yeah.
to actually winning public opinion.
When gay people got the right for gay marriage, plenty of gay men put on khakis and polo shirts and went on daytime TV to just look normal. And who do we have? It's a bunch of deranged lunatics. I had not come out as trans until 3 months ago. And I really wish to God I didn't have to. It's just, I'm a reasonably high profile person. And, I have no fucks to give. I don't like, no one can fire me for just saying the truth about the trans movement. And the problem, Brad, is if you say this stuff, you're a transphobe, you're a right winger, they'll just discredit you. I've literally spent the last decade working in progressive politics. I ran for Congress as a Democrat. My literal job is to raise money for Democrats, and I'm a trans one. They can't go after me with this bullshit. So we've got to have, what I'm asking is every single sane trans person out there, like, there's no help coming for us. We have to stand up and take back our movement. Because if we don't, this group of frauds is going to make us lose everything over trans women in sports and transitioning natal females, where if you look objectively at their detransition rates, there's no one that could look at this and think FTMs need to be transitioning while they're minors. These are often confused girls, a huge majority of them. So, like, we've got to change some stuff. And
But
like, I know you can sense the frustration in me. I'm
yeah.
not usually like this, but I'm just really at the end of my rope with this.
But so how has the feedback been for, and I have an inclination of how it's been for you, but
Overwhelmingly
from
positive.
trans
Yes.
people and the trans activists and just online, you've spoken out. I've seen you on Piers Morgan. I've seen you on a
Yep.
bunch of different podcasts and shows. Have you heard from some people quietly agreeing with you? Have you gotten a lot of nasty backlash or a little bit of both? What's the reception been like?
I have probably gotten 300 or 400 emails from normie people going, "You changed my mind on trans rights." I've probably had half of the Democrats, the trans people, they're Democrats that work here that aren't really public facing. They're just like the bread and butter trans Democrats working in the background saying, "Thank God you're finally saying this." I've had members of Congress reach out to me to talk about policy that the alphabet groups are telling them they have to stand by, asking for my opinion about this. I've had, very high incoming people that are going to be in government soon reaching out to me to talk about this stuff. So there is a understanding in the Democratic Party that something has to change and they are looking for new leadership. And that is what I am standing up to do. We got to change course on this. And the other truth is the Republicans, you know this, Brad, a lot of Republicans are not bigots. They just like the leaders will sometimes get power by being bigoted, but most Republicans, if you give them like, look, I had a health condition, I went to a doctor, I made some choices, it was good for me. I'm not asking you to do anything, just let me live my life and go get health care on my own. Most Republicans are fine with that, but that's not our message anymore.
No, our the message now focuses on things like trans women in women's sports, which I think just is such a tiny issue, but strikes people as so fundamentally unfair
Yeah,
and unreasonable
yeah,
that it rubs people the wrong way, even though it's really, in the grand scheme of things, just such a small number of people. But it's just so fundamentally, and part of the problem as well is what people really don't like feeling gaslit about biology. And so Chase Strangio, for example, tweeted, trans women are biological women because, and basically the argument is because they are women who are also alive and biological or something like, and I'm like, no, trans women are trans women, and the whole
yeah.
point is that they were born as natal males and they transitioned. So it's like this, and that's kind of the issue with women's sports when they say like, oh, there's no advantages here, you're all just a bigot when you see Leah Thomas at the podium or something. People don't like, most I think reasonable people are open-minded enough, are willing to make accommodations to treat people with dignity and respect their freedom, but they really don't like being gaslit and
That's
told
right.
that what you see as the sky is blue, no, it's green. No, it's green. You must say it's green or you're a bigot. And I think a lot of people have just gotten fed up and thrown the baby out with the bathwater in an unfortunate way, but it stems from just the unreasonable nature of a lot of the demands they've made, the meltdown over misgendering, the introduction of pronouns that are like inanimate objects, all these sorts of things that strike people as unreasonable. I mean, you can't make unreasonable demands of people and
No.
then be surprised when they say no.
No, of course not. And I have to tell you, I used to think it was like, this is just a right wing trope, right? That trans women don't know that they're biological males, right? This is just a right wing talking point. People don't really think this. But then when I came out and started arguing with people about this, it's like, no, there are a lot of trans women that actually think they're biological women. And I'm like, look, I personally believe something happened to me in the womb that just my brain went haywire. There are studies. I can show you a 2018 study that shows trans women, we have long sequences of protein receptors in our genes that we share in common that affect how testosterone and estrogen affects us, which personally is why I think most trans women look like me, like we're scrawny, gawky, like men. Testosterone obviously agreed with you more than me. And I think there's probably a genetic basis for what I'm going through. But I think it's just silly to pretend that we don't like have to undergo like HRT or facial feminization surgery, right? Like, just be honest about what we are. Like, I just don't understand it.
So let's to kind of close out our conversation a little bit. Some of my audience is very mixed, and some of them are at this point, I would say, effectively anti-trans. They
Okay.
support the bathroom bills. They think I was open-minded, but this has gone too far. We've got to go against all of it. And I that's not where I'm at, but I hear them. Make your case to them that they don't need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. They don't need bathroom bills. They don't need to strictly crack down and ban transitions for adults or anything like this. They just need to have a sensible middle of the road position on this stuff. Make that case for them to try to convince them not to go down that road.
So, Brent, can we, to answer this, can I just like kind of back up for a minute and tell you
Go
my
for it.
story and why I transitioned? So, I was 3. I really understood something was really, really deeply wrong with me. And, it started growing more and more serious. And like we would be separated by gender when we were in kindergarten. And I would just feel overwhelming shame, right? And, there was a sense like I never have any memory of not feeling as strongly as possible that I was supposed to be a girl. And every time growing up, I would talk to people or behave in a way that felt natural to me. I just got called, I don't know if I can use the F slur on here, but like that might have well been my name growing up. And, like I remember being very, very young and I was in so much pain. And I grew up in a religious right family. And I remember like thinking if I could kill myself, I would be reincarnated. I could be a girl in heaven. And I'm just like sticking this thing in a light socket, trying to electrocute myself to death and hold on just long enough to be free. It was so painful. And my childhood growing up, like every part of it was just hiding who I was, what I was interested in, how I wanted to speak. Like I would literally close my hands behind my back so I wouldn't let hand gestures out. Like I spoke in a monotone because I sounded like a valley girl if I didn't. Like this is just what I am. And I tried as hard as possible to live as a man. It nearly killed me. I was 19 with a full on drug addiction because, like, to try to get this need to be a woman out of my head, I would go do every single drug I could get my hands on. So, yeah, by 24, I was a drug addicted shut in. And, finally I got the courage to transition and my life just takes off. HRT instantly. Depression gone. Work ethic through the roof. In 5 years, I'm a national figure. I'm married. I've got a job. I'm not like taking resources from the state from being unemployed. I've created over 200 jobs over my career. So, there's something that happened to me. And I know it's weird for you. It is so hard to accept yourself. But it's like, this is just what I am. So I am asking everyone in your audience, just let people like me live our lives. Let us marry who we want to. Let us dress like, ideally, you're not even going to notice us as we go through life. And like, that's all I'm asking is the same leeway you have for gay people to just what they do in the bedroom is their business. Just give that to us.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that respect is a two-way street, and
It
people like
is.
you respect women, respect their spaces, want to blend in, don't want to cause problems, respect people, don't want to trample on their rights. Too many of the trans activists are demanding respect, but treating everybody else with conformity and contempt, and
Yeah.
or demands for conformity and contempt if you don't comply, and cancellations, and trying to micromanage what language people use. And I just worry, I really do,
We
that we're going
should.
to have to go through a backlash over the next few years. And hopefully things will even out in the long run and get somewhere sensible. But they overplayed their hand. You can go back and find me in 2017, 2018 saying this is going to cause a backlash, but we're seeing it in the polls. We're seeing it in our politics. And my call for people is just to maintain the nuance, to see that you can oppose excesses without going all the way to the opposite extreme. You can leave space for people to live differently from you, even if you don't fully understand them or they're just so different from you. Because ultimately, I think that's what we all just want, is the freedom to live our best lives. And that's what I want for my audience. And it's what I openly and 100% want for people like you. So thank you so much for joining me. Everybody, if you want to hear more from Bri, I'll put links to her social media and her podcast in the description. Let us know what you thought of this conversation. And if you want to hear more about this topic or who I should speak to next about it, let me know all of that in the comments below. And we'll talk again when I'm back from my trip next week.